Mr. Speaker, thanks very much for joining us. I want to ask you first about the news of last night. Michigan and Arizona both came back for Mitt Romney. You're now in third place for the delegate hunt. I saw a number of conservatives this morning on the internet, headed into the op-ed pages, wanting to know what the rationale is for your campaign now that you're in third and Super Tuesday polling so far. You're ahead in Georgia, but in Tennessee and Oklahoma, I think you're in second place now.
Are these the same conservatives who did not write any rationale when Santorum was in fourth place?
Very much.
And the same conservatives who thought in June and July that I was dead. And it's interesting to me, the same characters show back up regularly. The rationale for my campaign is simple. One, I am the only visionary in the race who has an outline of a really big change. You look at my Social Security plan for younger Americans, which is essentially the Chilean model of a personal savings account, and look at the tinkering that both Santorum and Romney do. You look at my proposal on energy for $2.50 a gallon gasoline, and they're non-proposals. Look at my suggestion we have to rethink the entire Middle East and be prepared to really take on and think through the challenge of radical Islam. Just item by item. Two, I'm the only candidate in the race who actually has achieved large-scale government change. As Speaker of the House, I helped lead the first majority in 40 years. The only 4 balanced budgets we've gotten in your lifetime were while I was Speaker. And I think that's a fairly important difference. And 3, I think I'm the only one of the candidates who could actually debate Obama decisively and defeat him. I mean,
how would you respond to these people now who are saying that, as Rick Perry was potentially a spoiler to you in South Carolina, who got out and helped you win, that your withdrawing would be able to help Rick Santorum beat Mitt Romney?
I don't believe it's true. I think the weaknesses that Santorum has as a big labor Republican would hurt him across all the areas I'm strongest in the South and in the Great Plains, in the areas where you have right-to-work states. The more they understand Santorum's voting record, I think the weaker he'll be. Second, I think you have to look at why did he lose the Pennsylvania Senate race by the largest majority in Pennsylvania history, literally the history of the state. And you have to ask yourself, what's his staying power? I mean, he's had 2 weeks of momentum. It almost carried him to victory in Michigan, but didn't. And that was with apparently a significant labor union increase in turnout. So I don't know that there's any great reason to believe he has any more staying power. You know, I've now survived Pawlenty, Bachmann, Kaine 1, Perry, Trump, Kaine 2, and I think as Santorum recedes, we'll have survived Santorum. It's the most amazing marathon I've ever been in.
Dick Durbin says you're at war with Islam.
No, I think radical Islam is at war with the United States. I think the fact that that'd be like some progressive in 1946 saying, "Why are we picking on Uncle Joe Stalin? Isn't he really our?" I mean, in fact, I think there's a lot of Henry Wallace in the current elite. And imagine, I've thought about writing a novel someday about Henry Wallace staying as vice president and his refusing to believe anything bad about the Soviet Union. Go back and look at 1946 and ask yourself, if the government had made it wrong to describe communism and had said you cannot explain any spy in the US with the term communist, you can't explain any movement in Western Europe with the term communist, you can't explain the intentions of the Soviet Union with the word communist, how would you have designed the Cold War? And that's how bad it is. I would say to Durbin that he is working with the most pro-Islam administration in American history, and that the Obama administration finds virtually every excuse to apologize, to excuse, to ignore, to avoid. And why is it that the army burning Bibles in 2009 doesn't deserve an apology? Because after all, those were only Bibles. But the second, political prisoners who are Muslim abuse the Quran by using it to deface it, to send secret messages. Suddenly we should be apologizing because their extremists were using the Quran. And I just had the president just tell, or the Secretary of Defense held a press conference and said, we feel really badly that these extremists were destroying the Quran. You'd have had a whole different conversation.
Mm-hmm. In 2008, Barack Obama campaign running ads in Alaska saying we needed to further develop the Alaska pipeline into the continental United States, that his policies would help bring down gas prices. Now he's saying there's nothing he can really do to bring down gas prices. Stephen Chu, the Secretary of Energy, says we really need European level gas prices, which are even higher than our high prices right now. What would you say to the president about policies to bring down gas?
Well, I would start at first of all, this is a man who ran in 2008 on the slogan, "Yes, we can," and who's going to run in 2012 on the slogan, "Why we couldn't." So I'm not surprised that this is just one more broken Obama promise. I mean, the field is strewn with failures on Obama's part to keep his word. I describe Secretary Chu as the Secretary of Anti-Energy. His position is we don't want it. It shouldn't be here. Why are they drilling? Why do they keep finding oil and gas? This is terrible. And Chu, somebody came up to me in Nashville 2 days ago and said that they understood the president's 999 plan. And I said, what? They said, the woman tell Herman Cain they had figured out what his 999 plan was. I said, what are you talking about? They said, it's $9.99 a gallon in gasoline, which would make Chu happy. So I start with the premise, a president who wanted to could dramatically impact the availability of oil and could dramatically bring down the price of gasoline. Ronald Reagan took Jimmy Carter's daily gas rationing. Young people don't remember this, but you used to, under Jimmy Carter, you actually could only buy gas every other day based on the last number of your license plate. And the first executive order Reagan signs deregulates gasoline. Within 6 months, the price crashes. When George W. Bush announced in the summer of 2008 that he was withdrawing the presidential order that blocked the development of offshore oil and gas, the price of oil dropped $9 that day. So, you know, the idea that the president can't have an impact, that there can't be something positive done, is just wrong. I've been advocating $2.50 a gallon gasoline because somewhere between $2 and $2.50 a gallon is actually the stabilizing price for the amount of capital investment you need in order to produce gas in more complex fields. There's no question that North Dakota, for example, is more complicated than the original Texas fields where you just had gushers coming straight up out of the ground.